so hard.
Hi, everyone. So, first of all, congratulations to everyone on reaching the gold medal round for the National Online Forensics Festival. Amazing job to both teams.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have all three judges here and active?
I am present.
All right.
Hi, I'm here too.
Okay, great. So, did you, as debaters, have any questions before we get started? You would like to
I had just a couple of questions in terms of like speed or judging preferences. How do you prefer your speed, and what's your feelings towards Ks and Ts?
Speed isn't going to be a problem, except I will say on this technology, I would be really reticent to say pushing speed, not because of anything other than I don't necessarily know if it will remain clear. And if we don't hear it, if I don't hear it, I can't flow it, and I can't be held accountable to know what you might have said. So in mind with any type of speed, clarity is obviously going to be the paramount. In terms of K, I am not a huge fan of K at all, but I will vote on what is argued. I would really appreciate clash on whatever arguments are made, but I will tell you up front, if you look at my judging philosophy on other things, I am predispositioned not to like to hear K. I like to hear arguments on the topic given.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
I'd say the same with me. I don't like Ks or Ts, but I'll still vote on them, but it's just not my preference to hear them in a debate. And speed, I would agree with the same things about connectivity, and I'm okay with it though, as long as you're still enunciating. Once you start losing that, I'm not a fan of it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, just to ditto what the other coaches said, I don't mind speed, but given the format, I haven't seen it like done successfully online just because you guys break up and then we don't catch stuff. I don't mind critical debate at all. I just ask, like, if you do have like an extensive roll of the ballot, maybe drop it in the chat as well so I get it down exactly. But of course, I'm here for the policy straight debate as well.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, before we get started, everyone please mute if you're not the one speaking. Also, if we start to get interference, I might recommend that people who aren't speaking turn off their cameras, because I've noticed when everyone's camera's on, it seems to have a little bit more problems. At least it did last round, where we had people cutting in and out. So outside of that, I'm ready to go. If judges are ready, whenever you guys want to start.
I'm good.
Okay, opponents, you guys all squared away?
Yeah, I'm just going to turn off my camera just so we don't run into those issues but when I'm not speaking.
Okay, awesome.
Don't worry.
I'm just gonna keep my camera on because like we're partners and it feels weird to have it off.
All right. Okay. 7 minutes speech. All right, time starting now. So, off the top, the thing that we are arguing today is that the United States federal government should ban Zoom. Now, we're going to be giving this is going to be a policy round, and so this is going to be a policy round given that this is something that we should do and this is an action and it's the most predictable thing that we can do. And then also we're going to be weighing this by net benefits, what's going to be the greatest good. Now, moving on to a little bit of background. So because of its competitive pricing program, Zoom has become extremely popular across the world and has been adopted, especially when it comes to schools, right? That's something that we've seen. I think I think it was the UC system actually had a deal set up with Zoom to so that way all professors and all the students are using it. So this has been propagated across the United States and across the world and has become this very prevalent platform for this for video chatting. Now, this software is very young. Zoom is not a company that's been very well established in terms of this sort of video chat service, whereas things like Skype or Google Hangout and Meetup it has been. And this poses a few issues. Now, this brings us over to our plan. The United States federal government, through act of Congress, would ban every public school from using the Zoom platform. Now, the first thing, in terms of. And so we're going to move on to our first advantage and the biggest thing we're going to have here in terms of tagline is going to be security flaws. So in our uniqueness level, Zoom has a lot of security problems. So, and not only that, but they also have a lot of shady practices. So this is according to a TechCrunch article in 2020. It was actually pointed out that they were actually installing malware, particularly on Macs, which means me and my partner are screwed. And then also they were routing a lot of these video calls through China. They were also like selling information or giving information to Facebook without the knowledge of these individuals, from their credentials from their Zoom accounts. And also one of the things that happened as well, according to Newsweek 2020, is over 500,000 of these credentials were sold on the dark web for like pennies on the dollar, incredibly cheap. So plan passes and we move away from this, right? All the like this sort of thing, because I mean what propagated this in the first place was schools, right? This is what really brought the Zoom platform to prominence, was the use of it from schools and students, and then students end up seeing it and they take it home and they end up using it with their families, and that's what really propagated this whole thing. Now in terms of our in link level, the plan passes and we move away from this, right? And then in internal link, we move towards a safer and fully encrypted video chat formats. Now, if you look at something like Zoom, it's not fully encrypted from end to end, whereas something like Google Meetup or something like Skype would be. Now, the impact of that is people are able to avoid the immense amount of financial hardship that come from having their identity stolen. There's been multiple instances of not only people's identity being stolen, which with that, obviously you could see things like credit card debt happening, or if it's not a credit card, people could also have information taken in terms of like their debit card, which is worse, that's harder to contest. But also in terms of people just breaking into people's computer and crashing their computers. This is a huge issue. A lot of families, especially those that come from a lower socioeconomic background, have only one computer in the home that everybody kind of uses. And they use, some people use it for school. One of the kids plays games on it, and then dad's got to do work on it, and so does mom. And so all these different things happen. If that computer crashes because they were using Zoom on it, in a lot of cases, that family's now not able to work from home. That family's now not able to video chat, and at least video chat safely if we don't move away from this Zoom platform. Now, moving on to our second advantage. So, and one thing I'd like to point out as well is that Zoom hasn't made a progressive move once figuring out that they've had all these security issues to actually change these things. Things like Google Meetup and things like Skype, whenever these things pop up and there's all these security things, they can monitor these things in real time and immediately send you emails, and they end up having you change your password and going through all these different things and having security questions, whereas Zoom does none of these things. So again, this is inherently unique to Zoom and is why we need to do this. Now, moving on to that second advantage. And this one in particular is going to be talking about child safety. So in the uniqueness level, one of the things that we'll see here is that Zoom bombing is becoming this massive problem, is happening often, right? And this is largely because of Zoom's lack of end-to-end encryption. Now, Zoom has done a bad job of this, right? They haven't done that end-to-end encryption, and they haven't fixed it. So some of this leads to, in a lot of cases, what happens with this Zoom bombing is people come in and they either just disrupt class, or in some cases, what ends up happening is pornography or gets streamed, or the Zoom bombers actually end up flashing the class in these cases. And also a lot of alt-right propaganda has also been put up on these as well, and that is a huge issue as well. And this is all according to Education Week in 2020. Now, on our link level, if our plan passes, people move away from this and move towards secure platforms like the Google Meet and Skype. Now, and then on our internal link level, at absent plan, we still have kids who are in kindergarten rooms being exposed to these sorts of things. As was pointed out by the Education Week 2020 source, it's pointed out that there are children who are in class with their teacher who are having pornography streamed on their during their Zoom session when they're trying to learn about colors and the ABCs, right? That's a huge issue. Now, moving on to the impacts of this. There have been multiple studies that have gone into the psychological effects that happen to children when they're exposed to these sorts of sexual ideas when they're young. They can lead to a lot of confusion, especially when those children aren't properly educated, either by their school system or by their families. So in terms of impact, this can have a large impact on these children. In a lot of cases, these children have these confused ideas about sexual interaction and can end up doing things in school where they could possibly get suspended because they saw that on Zoom, and they have this confusion about this sort of what sex is and what was going on when they saw that thing on the Zoom call. And kids become, and this can be psychologically detrimental to these children and can lead to a lot of problems down the line. When you see children at that age who have this sort of sexual confusion, a lot of times that can play itself out very badly in the rest of their life, and can sometimes end up becoming offenders and things like that because of the psychological detriment that takes place. And it also just is bad in terms of like the overall arc of their life. They could end up in prison, all these different things because of this sort of psychological damage that can be done by this. And for all these different reasons, you'll be voting for the affirmative. Thank you.
I'm going to start 2 minutes of flex time now.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, cool. All-time roadmap. The order is going to be one off. There's going to be like a case dump. Like we'll be answering case, but it's going to be in the form of dump. I'd recommend flowing it on a separate piece of paper, or just flow it on the plan text. You do you. You know your flow best. They're just heads up. All right, cool. Starting time now. Framework. The affirmative promises of tomorrow that will never come. The role of the judge is to evaluate the round in the present moment. Instead of constant craving, you should use the ballot to shape your individual orientation towards suffering. First argument, material desires fail. A study from the European Molecular Biology Organization found that correlation with material circumstances because desire is circular and reproducing. Second, suffering only exists as a relative mental phenomenon, even if the plan made it so that the worst harm in the world was having a slow internet connection that would eventually be painful as dying from the most horrific death imaginable. This is because the human mind is adaptive, which solves their offense. But third, inner peace comes first. Only your capacity to use the ballot to shape your own individual orientation towards the world it matters. A, Fiat's illusory. Voting affirmative doesn't pass a plan, so their harms are inevitable and you can presume negative. But B, agency. Reliance on the external mechanisms for change trade-offs with the only thing that we have control over, our own spiritual suffering. Any other approach denies our ability to realize liberation internally. Fourth, desire is epistemologically prior. Only inner peace allows us to see the world as it is free of the egotistical biases and delusions, which means our links indict the truth comes into PMC, which means you can vote neg on presumption there because negate means to deny the truth of. But fifth, predictions fail. Philip Tetlock asked more than 300 experts to make forecasts about real-world outcomes. Next week's predictions barely beat random guesses, proving no better than a dart-throwing chimp. Links. 1, fear of death. There's actually the first thing is going to be predictions. The affirmative's attempt to predict the model behaviors stem from an irrational desire to create meaning in inherently chaotic and fluctuating reality. Attempts to foresee and control external outcomes shift the focus away from resolving internal turmoil, which is the only thing we have control over. This emphasis predictions is a form of attachment which entraps us in samsara. But additionally, we also want to argue that predictions, the modeling, and the way they link to end other platforms, which is always going to be a specific link. But second, materialism. The affirmative's focus on material approaches to suffering re-entrenches our attachment to material wealth as a temporary fix for our desires, which in turn reproduces our material desires. In addition, emphasis on controlling external outcomes shifts the focus away from resolving internal turmoil, which is the only thing that we have control over. Meaning, the materialism is linked to desire to constantly protect our assets or security and control over money and identity. But the fourth argument is futurism. The affirmatives team are rooted in tomorrow that will never come. This constant clinging for a better world arises from the illusion of the self, which forecloses our ability to live in the present moment and strips life of meaning as we expend ourselves worrying about what we can't control. Impacts. One, the affirmative keeps us trapped in samsara, the suffering lens cycle of desiring, wandering without direction or purpose. Two, spiritual suffering. Fighting desire with more desire only generates more attachment, which in turn gives us more to crave for. The A argument on here is this is a prerequisite to material change. A fundamental dissatisfaction with life producing by spiritual suffering conditions is the way we experience material suffering. With B, turns case. Inability to reconcile the paradox of material desires means that we will always have more to crave for. This produces endless threats for us to combat on our absurd crusade for happiness in which we can never attain. Third, root cause of violence. Ignorance of the nature of suffering causes us to obsess the material objects without compassion for other sentient beings. This is the same logic that justifies atrocities like genocide and slavery, as material gains supersede our ability to be mindful. But fourth, reincarnation. All material gains are temporarily non-unique, as we constantly are reborn to new circumstances. A study done by Professor Jim Tucker reviewed 2,500 cases and found that reincarnation was the only explanation for children's recollections of past lives. Thus, the alternative, when tasked with answering the question posed by the resolution, we respond with mu. First, mu's Korean term meaning not have or without. In Buddhist traditions, is often translated meaning to give the question itself must be unasked, and because a dualistic answer should not be given. Second, rupture our dualistic understanding of the world is the first step of escaping samsara. Understanding the world in terms of moral binaries perpetuates the misconception that there is substantial self that exists independently of the world. Third, this solves the app. Breaking free from desires allows us to gain insights in the nature of the world, which is a precondition for solvency. Our reinventation results in a better vision of the app. Fourth, any permutation fails. A, the affirmative is the answer to the resolution, which is incompatible with training from our dualistic answer. But B, all alternative solves via inaction, so any inclusion of the plan fails. Go to case. This is going to be the dump. First argument is going to be that circumvention. We are using solvency takeout. We are literally using the solvency takeout right now on A by A, which means the harms exist with or without Zoom, which means you can vote negative presumption because banning Zoom just gives less means for schools, especially small schools who can't afford to contract with other programs like Google Hangouts, who charge fees just for having meetings and go to meetings because they're financially on the brink of collapse. Meaning that one, this plan never solves, but second, it always leads to the collapse of smaller schools, which is double-edged terminal offense and defense against a negative team. But third, any security issue with Zoom is null because vulnerabilities exist in computer hardware like our processing chips, according to Inspector General and Wired.com, meaning that even if there's any propensity to solvency for malware on the software level, at the point in which their harms are contingent upon China and there's hardware vulnerabilities, they have no propensity for long-term solvency, which means that harms of the app always become worse. And at worst is a masking this ad because we believe that we've somehow solved the vulnerabilities just because we banned Zoom. But third, there are other ways to vet the process in which Zoom bombs having. Literally, TAs at UCLA used a password and used a list of students and looked at entry names and who's already in class in order to vet. This is which means they were able to resolve all questions of Zoom bombings occurring, which can also be done by teachers. Meaning that if we ban Zoom, that just masks any propensity to understand how conferencing works, which allows for more bombing with other programs later. Which means even if you buy that there's some truth level of solvency on the affirmative, it only leads to these impacts and harms of the affirmative happening later down the line with different programs. But
also, they only ban in private public schools.
I was getting there. Also, they only ban public use, public schools' use of Zoom, which means that they don't solve for the private sector, which probably means just on that alone, on the plan nature of the plan text itself, they never solve for any of their harms because private schools will still have this issue, which means right there you can vote negative presumption because they don't fulfill any of their stock issues of resolving the harms, which means one, it serves as a masking this that still occurs with public schools, but also they don't resolve for any of this happening on the private sector. But the next argument is that they also mask racism because we think we've combated racism by banning Zoom, which just causes them to go to different mechanisms, maybe even a violent one. The A argument is that only way to resolve anything with this method, like with a method of a ban, would be to ban the whole internet, which is bad for communication and for education in the case of emergencies like during an earthquake or during an upcoming weather season, which risks lives. Look, we're not saying that's literally what they're doing, but the only way to be able to solve for that would be to do that type of thing. So yeah, go to case. Particularly go down to the advantage one, go to your uniqueness. They say security. The following three responses. First, security is always going to be terminally non-unique. Cross-apply the analysis on the case stump. But second is that this will always, they'll always circumvent this at the point in which we have literally outlined why hardware will be an issue and they can happen to other programs. It's going to be reasons to why the security issue is one, non-unique, but also never being able to solve for it. But next, go down to the link level. The first argument we have is solvency block we have against the plain text takes all this out and also turns this argument, meaning that even if you grant the link, it just means that it supercharges the impacts of the affirmative. But next, you can go down to the internal link. The first argument, they say, yeah, actually just go down to the impacts, right? Go down to where their impact of hardship. The following response is that first, our turn on the link level means you always make hardships worse in this in the role of the affirmative. But second, it's always going to be outweighed by the impacts of the criticism. Look, at the point in which we literally have bigger impacts than what hardship is defined be, right? Like they say, they give you like these smaller impacts versus the impact of literal death of the negative, which means we're winning the impact.
Advantage two.
Go to advantage two. The cross-body analysis on how this is non-unique, which means it takes out all their offense. But second, I can provide any source for this, and also because these boomings and the whatnot are illegal, it's probably a reason why courts check back. Also, we're outweighing on the impact level. Also, the masking dissent applies here. This was a little bit messy, but you can cross by the entirety of the solvency block, and the answer is advantage one as to why advantage two doesn't flow across. So vote neg.
Okay, so a 2-minute cross-ex?
Yeah, I put the role of the judge in the chat. If that's you needed that.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. So, Derek, do you have a question? If not, I'll ask the first question.
No, go for it.
Okay, so under the negation world, would Zoom be still allowed in all schools?
Would Zoom still be allowed in all schools?
Yeah, you're negating, so basically you're saying there will be no ban on Zoom? Just a simple like yes or no would be like sufficient, because I didn't hear anything specific on case saying that you guys would not be not banning. I didn't hear any counterplan. So
the alternative would be able to solve the case. So it would be able to solve the harms of the case. But if the harms include sort of banning Zoom, and that is the process, and that is we have indicted, then no, of course we're not banning.
But under the negations role, and in terms of the fact that there was no counterplan presented, wouldn't you therefore state that because the negation's role is to negate and there was no counterplan presented?
So like, sure, we don't provide a traditional fiated counterplan text. We would say that the alternative is...
Yeah.
The alternative resolves the AF. So the alternative is an counter advocacy.
Just quickly, if you could restate the link and just maybe like a sentence if possible, just a quick like tagline for the link.
Each three links?
Yeah,
please.
So first, the first link is this sort of predictions on how you try and attempt and model and predict behaviors and create meaning from an inherently chaotic reality. This means, like, for example, when you make predictions over when they'll go to these sort of end-to-end platforms and constantly go in this direction, and this is how society will treat it.
Totally. Before we end time, I just had a quick.
We need the other two, please.
Yeah, the materialism, which you
what is the alt exactly? What exactly is the alt? Just in a tagline.
It's Moo.
What?
Moo, MU. It's an engagement. You reorient. The question is, it's a reorientation of our understanding. How instead of constantly focusing on sort of binary yes or no answers, we decide to unask the answer. It's in Buddhist philosophy. It's well in line with the terms of the koans and this sort of viewpoint.
Okay. So, I will do a quick off-time roadmap. So I'm going to begin by addressing the, I guess, the K that they presented, and then I will go on to state why our case still is able to fully stand and why we win under the affirmation. So I'm going to begin my time now. So again, I want to make it very clear that their Mu, again, the Buddhist philosophy, again, it all surrounds this idea of we can't predict these terrible things from happening. I'll really get into this case is that we're not really doing predicting of anything. These are things that are currently happening and that are Zoom specific. And we're going to get into that into my case. But I want to go to the link level of this doesn't solve anything. If we go under the negations world, they provide no solvency for any real world actions. To the point when I asked repeatedly during Flex to an answer was very well avoided, I continue to ask, under the negation world, would Zoom still not exist? And they had no answer to that because it would. Under the link level, there was no solvency. When they state, oh, well, we just can't predict all these things happen, that is simply what their K is stating. They're saying that we can't have this debate where we're saying yes or no, because that doesn't provide any real world answers. However, that is simply not true. And at least under the affirmation world, we are providing solvency for an answer. So again, this gets to the point where they have no link and they have no solvency. So when it comes to this point, now we can go on to, so let's look at the specific alt that they provide because they were able to put it in the chat. The role of the judge is to evaluate the round in the present moment. Instead of constant craving, you should use the ballot to show your individual orientation towards suffering. And again, today's debate, we really need to be talking about the actual education here, okay? Today's debate, we need to be talking the education of whether or not Zoom should be banned. And so I would really love to have a debate on this and not have a debate on whether or not we should be debating whether or not we can even be debating. That's really what their case seemed like. Should we be having yes or no answers? Should we live in constant fear or not? But we are in a debate round right now. We have impacts and we have real world impacts. Under their thing, we're completely skewed out. How could you provide a uniqueness link, internal link impact level in terms of our case if you're not able to provide impacts? It's to the point where they state that all of this is all just predictions, but it's simply not predictions. So now let's get onto an actual link level of what's truly happening with Zoom specifically. So again, I want to get to their very, what they stated as just like a block or a dump. So again, they say that the harms exist with or without Zoom, but I want to make it very clear. First of all, actually, no, let's go on top of case because that was very important. The reason why we're doing this with public schools is because it's the most predictable ground. The most predictable ground is what can the USFG actually enforce? You know, we're not a communist society. We can only do what we actually enforce. And the US controls the Department of Education, the public Department of Education. It is the most predictable ground because that is what Zoom's being used for. The US actually could ban the public education. That is why we're going this definition. Otherwise, we could have been considered extra topical. So that is why we were able to use the definition of public, and that is why it really does apply to schools. So they say it is non-unique because this allows, this could be with anything, but it's been very specific to Zoom, to which there was no refutation on this, and we provided multiple warrants. According to TechCrunch March 31st, shady business, putting malware into Macs, something that personally happened to my own Mac. I'm currently trying to deal with that issue of having a really bad virus. Again, they're selling things to Facebook. They're routing calls to China. These are all Zoom specific because of how cheap it is. So let's do this again. They say it leads to collapse of smaller schools. Again, this will not happen. This is again going to be enforced by the federal government. This is public schools that have public funding. So again, this is very specific to Zoom. These are very specific Zoom related things. So that's why under the actual this is why we're actually going to have to look at our thing under security, because the Google Hangouts, Microsoft has end-to-end encryption, something that Zoom currently does not have. Absent plan, considering the fact that the negation does not negate the fact that Zoom would not happen, takes away any reputation that they even could provide because of the simple fact that they agree the security actions happen. So anything under the affirmation world, this would happen. And I want to say that these are not predictions. This isn't just not blowing things out of water like their alt tries to assume on why we need to look at their alt, because these are real world things that are happening. This is not us predicting. This is us not trying to blow things out of proportion. This is us living in the present. Present things that are happening are that we're selling information to Facebook. We're routing calls to China. More than 500 Zoom things are being sold. And what this is leading to is people that are losing money. People are open to identity theft. And according to Tom's Guide, April 15th, bank information has been sold repeated times due to this. And this is not going to make hardships worse. Again, this is specific through public schools, and that is why we're able to do this, because the USFG can actually enforce this. So now that we've gotten to all those points, let's actually get to the risk of children. So the only refutation to this is that TAs at one school were able to put a password and that solved the issue. However, this is simply not true. Think about it this way. If a hacker is able to get to the point where they're able to figure out software to get into a Zoom, what's to stop them from then using another password, which there are multiple on the internet, password creators, to just continue pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing. Within 30 seconds, the password can be inputted, put in, and they're able to get into Zoom. Something that has been repeatedly happening in classes. So this takes out any reputation that they could have had. And again, we can, they say that we can't perm the alt. We can absolutely perm the alt because it's just an ideology. If we take, it's just an ideology. We can simply state that just by looking at what Zoom actually is, we can still do this. And again, their entire alt was just, instead of constant craving, instead of living all this, live in the present moment, we can perm the alt because we are living the present moment. We aren't perpetuating anything. Sorry, we're trying to figure out partner communication still. And so again, when we're looking at things that are actually net beneficial, let's look at an actual net beneficial part of this debate. There is no net benefits to looking towards the negations thing. They provide no actual real world solvency to the point that we are going to be able to see real world things being done. They state that we can't see real world things being done, but absolutely could. We said that we have no actual ability to put in the place in the solvency. They stated that in their K, that out has no province because they have no ability to do this. We absolutely do. We have solvency for this. And ideologies have no movement. The negation has no movement, has no solvency, has nothing they can actually do. Their K is simply just a theory with no action. We could do this. We could do this ideology if we want, but if anything, it takes away the education. The fact that I've had to spend so much of this debate just defining the fact that we can't do this takes away to the point that we're not able to have an actual clash on whether or not Zoom is inherently bad or Zoom is inherently good. We are no longer to have this debate anymore because they've been able to take that away from us to the point that they weren't even able. They stated that they were going to put a full flesh out on our debate, and I was waiting to hear line by line and be able to actually clash and be able to have such a fun educational debate on this because it's something that we deal with every single day is Zoom, most of us, and I would have loved to have a debate on that, and that would have been so amazing to have, but it's to the point that I have to talk about the fact that we even have to look at the ideology of living in the present moment instead of constant craving. We're not constantly craving for attention. We're not constantly craving for that. We are looking at a present world, real thing that is happening. Zoom bombings that are continuing to happen. Children that are literally exposed to pornography, something that was completely ignored. So even if we look to the negations world of, oh, this can, Zoom can still happen, which would continue to happen under the negation world. There's nothing stopping this from happening in the negation world. Children will, like they are in the present, still be exposed to naked adult bodies, something that is psychologically traumatizing, something that was never touched on by the negation because they want to believe that this is not a real world issue because it simply is a real world current issue that is going on. And just because they say that it's still happening does not mean that we can not reduce it because we are reducing it. Under our plan, we are not allowing Zoom to be used because Zoom has been proven to be a corrupt, lying company. And that is why you'll be voting voting AF today. I hope I got my statements right. We're AF. I got very jumbled with that statement. Two minutes of cross.
It's 1 minute. I'm doing the 1 minute now. Sorry. No problem.
Down for 2 minutes.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the order is going to be a brief overview, then the criticism, down, then the case dump, and the case proper.
Okie doke.
Is everyone ready?
Yep, good to go.
There's a couple of ways you can be voting negative pretty easily. One, material desires fail. Despite wanting a policy round, this round is just proof of how material desires fail overall, and that by reorientating the way in which you focus on suffering towards a non-dualistic approach based in mu, you are able to solve for these problems with material desires. Even if they win some level of the predictions fail arguments, they have dropped the other two links. Even independently of that, you can be voting not even evaluate the K if you don't want, and we'd still be winning on a large portion of the conceded solvency takeouts and turns going out of advantage on advantage 1 and 2. Let's go first on the frameworks. Extend across the role of the judge how the affirmative promises tomorrow that will never come. The role of the judge is to evaluate the round in the present moment. Instead of constant craving, you should use the ballot to shape your individual orientation towards suffering. First, they have conceded that material desires fail according to Embo, found that evolution molded us to act in the apparition of happiness despite having no sort of a relationship, which means if you constantly desire this kind of control overall and you constantly want sort of in order to make these changes, you will never be able to make changes and make the world better, which means it's the terminal solvency deficit of the app because they can never make changes. This goes cold conceded, which means you auto vote neg. In addition, they have dropped that you must have inner peace come first. One, because fiat is illusory, which means if fiat is illusory, they have no app, the app doesn't exist, and you auto vote negative because it will never, their harms are inevitable and will always happen. But second, they have conceded it sort of seats as the sort of seating an agency, so and denies our ability to sort of realize liberation. What this means is we constantly focus on a future that will never come and constantly cling into the harms over and over and over again. They also have seen as conceded that desire is epistemically prior, otherwise our world is completely clouded by egoistic delusions, which means the criticism always outframes and comes before any of the case. So even if you believe that they're winning some level of the case, you have to evaluate the criticism first. Second, they have on the link level. They have fifth, they have conceded predictions fail, which means all their solvency and their belief that they solve it is never correct. They will always fail. They'll never be able to resolve, which means you always vote negative right there. They may have gone for this sort of predictions takeout. Here's why it doesn't matter. They have dropped the other two links. One, they constantly focus on material approaches in order to try protect your identity and securitize against constant theft overall and protect your sort of identity and money, which means this constantly shifts away from our ability to control sort of our internal turmoil that reproduces all the impacts of the app. They are also clinging to a future that will never come. There will never be a future where we completely secure in all our being, in everything, which has never happened. This constant craving comes from an illusion of the self, which means that only by eliminating this notion of the binary notion of the self and the sort of orientation of seeing others as less than or different than, will you sort of recreate, be able to solve for any of the impacts. Extend across the second impact of Turn's case and how the inability to reconcile the paradox of material desire means we will always have more to crave for and endless threats. This means we will always crave for more and more security. We will always crave for more and more malware to be on computers. We will always crave for more and more identities and money, and which turns the advantage one. But we also always crave for this sort of control over sort of domination and sort of wanting to assert our control that leads to a lot of this violence they talk about in section in advantage two, which means they always create this because people will always want it. They also extend across their alternative that which is mu, this and how it's a Korean term meaning not have or without, and how one that this sort of engaging in a reorientation where by adopting mu you reorient how you understand the world in order to solve this sort of endless suffering instead of looking towards material desires or this binary notion of yes, no, good, bad. You engage in sort of a first step. This allows us to break down the cycle of samsara, which causes all the root of violence, which means we solve the af in the first place, which means the af solves the neg and has a risk of solving the entirety of the alternative, which means you're doing it right there. But in addition, you have conceded that it's a precondition for solving from the af. This actually is two things. One, it means it's try or die for the alternative to be able to resolve for the af, because breaking free free from desires is the only way in order to gain the true nature of the world, which is a precondition for solvency. 2, even if you don't buy that the alt solves, it means that the AF doesn't solve because they don't engage in this sort of epistemic reorientation. They have a few wrong responses. 1, that there's no solvency in the real world. First, they have not isolated sort of why. This just makes this assertion with no warrants. They have conceded both are solvency points. 2, they say Moo can't predict what is currently happening. We're not trying to make any sort of, normative predictions overall. We're saying that a re-engagement and reorientation would be able to solve. They say they have no links, but clearly we have already indicted. Their only other argument is we need to be talking about this policy education. That begs the question of why this policy education is good in the first place. Why must we engage? They have conceded desires epistemically prior. So in order to understand policy education, we need to understand our orientation and our epistemology and how we produce knowledge and how we produce education in the first place, which means the alternative and the criticism becomes a prior question. Second, they say that they have been skewed out. How are we supposed to provide uniqueness, link, and impact? There are multiple things you can do, which is sort of, you can make a permutation. You can offer a competing methodology. You can say, no, your alpha is a good idea, which is your job as the affirmative. We are negating this sort of, we're saying the resolution in the alpha is a bad idea because it leads to all these impacts and you have to engage in mood. The same way you engage in a counterplan or a disad is the same way you engage. You have not isolated how or in any way you have been skewed out. Second, they say you can do both. They have dropped the permutation fails on how the affirmative is an answer to the resolution, and only by doing sort of inaction are you able to do it. So by sort of both banning Zoom and doing Moo, you can't do something and do nothing. Second, they have conceded the alt solves the AF, which means even if you do buy some level of it, we've already solved the AF, so there's no reason to risk any sort of inclusion, only a chance of a disad to the permutation not being able to fully solve. Okay, let's go to the topic case. They say that we're using the federal government because it's the most predictable. We're not running T on you. We're saying you don't solve because you're going to private schools that will also go to these places, which means you always have this Zoom bombing. You always have this sort of you always have this sort of security flaws, which means you're never able to solve overall. It's not about what you can, what or not you're able to do via the resolution. It's about the resolution your plan text doesn't solve. Second, you have also considered the analysis that it sort of masks the problem, believing we solve, and that right now, third, we're literally on 8x8, another platform that doesn't use this sort of end encryption and still exists, which means you're never able to solve in the first place. And you can vote negative on presumption right there, negate the deny the truth of, or the risk of any sort of disad that masked future solvency. In addition, you're not able even to say you also have created these sort of worse things because we already have hardware flaws that lead to these sort of encryption in the first place and these sort of security flaws, which means you're never able to solve it. You mask the problem, and Moo can solve.
Cool. Really quick. The order will be overview. A lot of like the arguments I'm going to make are kind of overview, so I'd recommend filling out a separate paper because the speech is going to be like made of layers and preamps, and it'll have subpoint structure. But you do you. So yeah. That being said, let me get my timer. All right, cool. Starting time now. The only way you're voting for today is a negative, at the point in which it becomes an easy ballot on 3 separate layers. We'll be doing this speech in layers and preamps. The first layer is going to be the K debate. First, the A argument is going to be you have conceded that the affirmative, the negative advocacy resolves all the root cause of the affirmative harms without biting any of the turns, which means there's only risk of resolving both the AF and the neg by voting negative. But B, but the B argument is impact weighing, right? They have conceded that that the impact of not voting negative is the logic of genocide, which means we outweigh on a magnitudinal level. But second, even if you don't buy that, the point at which they have not extended any part of the impact of the AF, it means that the only world you have to evaluate left still in this debate is the negative impacts. And if we're the only team with any impacts and any propensity of solvency and for the framework and harms, it means you can automatically vote there. The C argument is going to be that the alternative is not open to permutations because they have conceded all the framework arguments. We tell you that any link to the AF is an indictment of the PMC, which means that all links are disadds to the perm, meaning that permutation only risks triggering the impacts. At the point in which you can resolve the affirmative at its root cause and resolve the neg by voting neg, you might as well just vote neg and endorse the advocacy. But the D argument is going to be, you have conceded the framework arguments about why material desires fail and why only by reorienting ourselves to a dual, by rejecting a dualistic motion and reevaluating our epistemology are we able to have any sort of access to educational benefits of the app in the first place, meaning even if you win on some sort of one case level that you're winning, and second, that policy education is good, we have to evaluate our orientation towards suffering before accessing any of that in the first place. Plus, you always create more craving and desire, which turns the entirety of advantage ones, which you have conceded, which means there's still terminal offense on case. The argument, you have also conceded that Fiat is illusory and sees isn't agency, which means one is a terminal offense and defense against the affirmative team, because the act doesn't happen and the way we Fiat things is probably also bad. But the F argument is that all links flow across, except maybe they might try to go for the prediction link. But even if you buy that they have offense against prediction link, you can still flow across the other two links, which go conceded throughout the entirety of the debate. The G argument is you have also conceded the role of the judge, which means that if they have conceded the framework of the neg, the only team that attempts to resolve the framework of the negative team is the negative team, which means you just vote neg right there. Don't do the work for them. They've conceded framework, which means we're the only team with any linkable offense. But the H argument is going to be predictions of solvency fails, which you have conceded, which means there's no propensity of solvency at all for the affirmative team. But F argument is going to be that you have also conceded all propensity for negative alt solve. You have conceded the entirety part of the K. The second layer is going to be case. The A argument is going to be that you have conceded all the circumvention arguments about racism and predatory behavior will always happen and only be masked as a result of thinking we've somehow solved it by banning Zoom, and it'll just simply go to other hardware. But the B argument, you have all other software. But the B argument, you have also conceded that there's hardware issues such as processing chips and motherboards, which probably means that thinking we've solved for it by banning Zoom, one, masks this, but second, makes that a prime target and is an easier target for hackers, which probably means that this is both terminal and terminal offense and defense against the affirmative team, which means even on the case level, even if you're not buying K, you're voting us there. But next, the C argument is going to be that you have also conceded that you don't resolve it for all schools, meaning that the harms of the affirmative always happen in private schools still, which means there's no need for the affirmative plan. Sure, there's an advocacy where it says that we can probably resolve that too, but that's literally the point of the alternative, but we're able to resolve that. Plus, you don't solve. Yeah, so the preamps first, they're going to try to go for that still exists. Cross by the turns and plus why the case solves for harms. This reason why Zoom still existing probably isn't responsive offense. But second, they're also going to try to go for how they weren't able to engage. However, you can use the arguments that Josh says, you can weigh the app against the negative team or why the app advocacy resolves the framework or the impacts of the negative, which you have not done. But the third argument is that they're going to try to go for this perm. However, at the point in which we've already covered why links are disadds to the perm and why if you have that flawed logic and epistemology, a permutation only risks supercharging and masking the impacts of the negative, you can automatically vote negative there. So all those reasons, vote neg.
Okay, 1 minute of flex.
All right. Should be it there. All right. Quick off-time roadmap. Quick off-time roadmap. We're going to be right off the bat addressing K, and then we're going to be going over their refutation in terms of case, and we'll be going from there. And then we'll be giving some voters and as to why you'll be voting for the affirmative. All right. Make sure. Okay. All right. Time starting. Okay. Time starting now. So the first thing we're going to be going over, Judge, is going to be this K. So again, we're going to point out that you're not going to be voting for the K, and here are a few different reasons. So they say that we can see the arguments in terms of link level, in terms of solvency, and in terms of their alt, but we absolutely did not. My partner addressed both of those, and here and again, we point out in both cases that if you look specifically at the K in terms of their especially their alt level, they talk about being they claim that we're impractical because you can't predict, but at the same time they're also saying that we should do absolutely nothing and move everything to a Buddhist ideology, which of Mu, which I'm from a dairy town, that means something completely different where I'm from, but like that sort of thing, and saying that they need that we should move towards this, but they're saying that we're impractical, when in actuality they're advocating for something that is a way of thought and doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going to happen. They're saying that we should move towards this and people should move away from materialism, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. That doesn't mean that ends up taking place. So again, they don't have any sort of solvency here. Again, and then my partner did address their link level in terms of materialism and predictability. And Clarice, do you have the third one? I don't have it off the top of my head.
It was that, and I think the whole like no fear thing, like you just have to be like living in the
and then the third link of like having to live in like that, living in the moment, and that getting rid of and that moving instead of moving away from this constant craving and like reshaping what you believe is suffering. All of these things, again, do not solve for the problem that we were given in this resolution as a whole. So, and this comes back to our argument that this completely strips this argument of this completely strips this whole debate of education. One of the things that we talked about was the fact that like this is a policy thing and that we should move towards change. And one of the things that they've been saying is that they're saying that we don't solve because we're not getting rid of all of it. Again, we have never said, and the resolution has never stated, that we have to get rid of all of these things, right? But as we pointed out, there have been many instance, whether it's our advantage 1 or our advantage 2, where these things take place. And we never said we were going to solve for predatory and racist behavior. We never said we're going to solve for all internet security flaws. We want to reduce them. That is what we're doing. And under our plan, we do that. So that argument that we don't have any sort of solvency because we aren't getting rid of it in its entirety is just not going to stand, because that's not the case. We are still reducing it, which again, we said that we're weighing this by net benefits. And that in itself is that weighing mechanism we win on, which again, they're saying that, that you should prefer their framework. Again, we set the framework, and we did not concede their framework in terms of
point of order.
Sure.
The articulation specifically on the burdens and how they don't have to solve for the entirety of like X, Y, and Z is new impact weighing / like part of drop arguments that don't come out of the MG. So yeah, we get like resolutional arguments about like the whole
my partner definitely brought it up.
Eric, I brought up in the fact that we are solving for the majority. We're solving for the public sector, for public schools.
Yeah. That was even like, if you want to be specific, that was specifically something that she brought up and tied into the fact that you said it's only public schools being solved for, and she pointed out that we don't have to solve for everything. We're just reducing, and she cross-applied that to our advantage too.
Judges, what's your decision?
We'll take it into consideration.
Okay. I forgot to stop my time. Does anybody have time on that by any chance?
I did not. I've not been doing time.
Okay. Shit.
I didn't catch it either.
All right. It said like 1 minute and 26 when I finally got to it. Is everybody cool with like 1 minute and 40? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's with me.
All right. Awesome. Restarting time now. So again, yes, my partner did absolutely bring that up, and that's where you're going to be voting for the affirmative, because we do make things better in terms of the status quo. Whereas our opponents come up and say that we should move towards this Buddhist theory and just assume that this sort of thing is just going to take place, and that this is going to solve again.
That I present, give the specifics of actual things that are being solved.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So moving on to our case, talking about what we are actually solving. As we pointed out within our first advantage, there are multiple security flaws that come from Zoom in particular. And we pointed that out. We say within our uniqueness all the different examples of the shady practices that happen, whether it's malware, routing calls to China, all these different things, the amount of information that's been stolen. And then also talking about the impact of the financial hardship. And they're saying, well, if these people would just, if these people would move away from this materialism, then they would feel better. Again, We point out that that is not how the world works, and that this sort of moo ideology doesn't actually operate within the real world as well as our plan does, and as we point out within our arguments. Now, and again, the moo plan doesn't solve for that either, because they're making the assumption that everybody's just going to adopt this ideology. Now, moving on to the ad 2, and the ad 2 again, they said that, oh, this is going to happen, so just leave it as is. Again, just because we're not getting rid of it in its entirety doesn't mean that a reduction isn't a positive move within the status quo. So today, Judge, you're going to be voting for the affirmative, and here's why. When we look at magnitude and probability of what's the most probable thing, it's not probable people are going to move towards moo. It's probable that we can ban Zoom and move towards moving away from these security flaws and protecting these children and child safety, and that's why you'll be voting for the affirmative. Thank you. That is obnoxious.
Righteous.
Primer.
Thank you, everyone. You guys did a fantastic job, both teams. We've been asked not to disclose, so we will be submitting our ballots. And each of your coaches should have received a link. You guys are specifically supposed to go to a certain 8x8 room to wait.
Wait, I'm sorry. For a quick second, you cut out. So we're not going to be disclosing and then moving to the 8x8 room, you said?
We are not disclosing here. They have specific links for all competitors in each of the different categories to go to those rooms. Your coach as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
It was a great debate. It was awesome debating y'all.
Handshake.
Yeah. Good job, Josh. You did a really good job.
Hybrid.
You too. What?
Hybrid is very hard. Good for you guys for being able to do a hybrid.
Yeah, hybrid is hard. So good job, guys. You guys did well.
Okay,
Congratulations again, guys, for making it to the final round.
Thank you.
Congratulations, y'all.
Good job, everyone.
Good job.